Everything around us, wealth, success, power, will fade away. But one thing will always remain, unaffected by time or circumstance: faith. And so a big question arises: what are you building your life on? Think about how much time and energy we spend on things that don't last. We rush into careers, seek possessions, and strive for recognition. But in the end, what is really left? Imagine a great storm that swept away everything you had. Your possessions, your fame, your pursuits, all gone. What would remain? Surely it would be your faith, something that cannot be destroyed by time or circumstance. And this is the message in the book of Hebrews that reminds us once again: everything in this world will fade away, but the kingdom of God will last forever. So, have you ever wondered if everything you think about faith is true? Are the strict rules and old traditions that we believe in really necessary to get close to God? Or maybe, those beliefs are preventing us from approaching Him in a more direct, authentic way. This is not only a question that challenges our beliefs, but an invitation to reevaluate the way we live our faith. In the end, the only thing that will remain is a true relationship with God. For centuries, people believed that the only way to reach God was through prophets, priests, and complex rituals. They lived in a system where faith was inseparable from the law, where every step toward God was bound by strict rules and sacred traditions. But then, one day, a radical declaration changed everything. The book of Hebrews opens with a shocking truth. In the past, God spoke through the prophets, but now He has spoken through His Son. Hebrews 1 verses 1 to 2. This was a complete upheaval of the religious system. It forces us to ask a crucial question: if Jesus is truly who Hebrews claims He is, then what does that mean for everything that came before? Imagine living at that time. You grew up in a world where people believed that your actions determined your standing with God. You had to go to the temple, offer sacrifices, follow hundreds of laws, and only the high priest could enter the most holy place, the very presence of God. But now, a message is spreading: you don't need any of that anymore. Let that sink in. The barriers that once separated humanity from God, the need for a mediator, the rituals, the sacrifices, were gone. The doors to God's presence were now open. But how? How could something so deeply ingrained in human history suddenly become obsolete? To fully grasp the weight of this, let's step into the shoes of someone who had spent their entire life devoted to the old ways. Imagine you are a devout follower of the law. You've seen your parents and grandparents bring sacrifices to the temple year after year. You've memorized the laws, obeyed the customs, and structured your entire life around staying clean before God. Then one day, someone tells you, it's finished. The final sacrifice has already been made. You are free. Would you believe it, or would you fight against it? This is what made the message of Hebrews so controversial, so disruptive, so life-changing. It wasn't just saying that Jesus was another great teacher or prophet. It was declaring that Jesus was the fulfillment of everything that had ever been written, that He was greater than all that had come before. No more prophets needed, because the final message had already come. No more sacrifices required, because the ultimate sacrifice had been made. No more high priest standing before God on your behalf, because now, you had direct access to Him. This wasn't just a new way of thinking, it was a new reality. And it was so radical that it divided people. Some clung to the old ways, unwilling to let go of what they had known. Others embraced the truth and experienced a freedom they never imagined possible. Think about it like this. Imagine a world where only the most powerful leaders could speak to the king. Ordinary people had to send messages through layers of officials, waiting for approval. But then, one day, the king himself throws open the palace doors and says, "Come in any time. Speak to me directly." That's what Hebrews is saying. The barriers are gone, the doors are open. But what does this mean for us today? If we're honest, many of us still live as if we are bound by old systems. As if we must earn our way to God's approval. We create our own modern versions of sacrifices. Whether it's through religious performance, good deeds, or striving for perfection. Thinking that somehow, we need to prove our worth to God. But Hebrews dismantles that mindset. It tells us, stop striving, the work is done, the sacrifice has been made, the invitation is open. And that forces us to ask ourselves. Are we still clinging to what has already been replaced? Are we living as if Jesus wasn't enough? This is the question that Hebrews places before us. A question that challenges, disrupts, and ultimately, sets us free. In ancient times, priests had one of the most fearsome jobs. They had to enter the holiest place on earth, the Holy of Holies, to offer sacrifices for sins. If they made a mistake, they could die on the spot. These strict rules were not new, they were central to the religious system of the time. It was the only way to ensure that the people's sins were forgiven. But the problem was that no sacrifice was enough. They had to do it over and over again. Each time they entered the Holy of Holies, they had to bring the blood of a sacrificial animal with them, hoping that the sacrifice would be accepted. But then the book of Hebrews makes another shocking statement. We have a high priest who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin, Hebrews 4 verse 15. This changed everything. We are no longer faced with a system that demands repeated sacrifices. But instead with a perfect high priest who not only offers sacrifices but becomes the sacrifice himself. This is an unprecedented reversal. Imagine this, you are in a courtroom, accused with every piece of evidence against you. There is no way to escape. The judge is about to pronounce sentence when suddenly his own son steps forward and says, I will take their place. The entire legal system changes in that moment. That is exactly what Jesus did. And not only that, he opens up a new way of approaching God. Think about it another way. Imagine you are living in Old Testament times. You grow up in a society where the temple is the center of faith. You know that only priests can stand before God on behalf of the people. You know that each year, only one man, the high priest, was allowed to enter the most holy place to make atonement. And now, suddenly, the message is delivered, you no longer need anyone to stand between you and God. You can go directly to Him. Imagine the shock that must have been. A system that had existed for centuries was suddenly turned upside down. There were no middlemen, no barriers, just an invitation. Come near to the throne of grace, Hebrews 4 verse 16. And that is the great difference between the old priesthood and the new. The old priesthood was built on repetition, endless sacrifices, endless rituals. But the new priesthood is built on completion. Jesus is not just a priest, he is the Lamb of God. When he said, "It is finished," John 19 verse 30, it was not just a statement, but an affirmation that the work of redemption was complete. However, this raises an important question. If all has been completed, why do people continue to look for other ways to come to God? Why do so many people still live as if they must atone for their sins? Do we have to earn God's approval on our own? The answer may lie in human nature. We are so used to having to do something to be accepted. We are taught from childhood that we have to work, that we have to achieve, that we have to prove our worth. So when faced with free grace, we tend to be skeptical. We think there must be a condition attached. But Hebrews emphasizes that there is no condition other than faith. For by grace you have been saved, through faith, Ephesians 2 verse 8. What does this mean for us today? It means that we don't have to live in fear or try to earn something on our own that Jesus has done for us. It means that we can approach God with confidence, not with hesitation. It means we can stop trying to please God by our own efforts, because the work of redemption is complete. But most of all, it means we are free, free to worship, free to live, and free to walk in the confidence that we have been accepted. The priesthood changes everything, not only in how people approach God but also in how they see themselves. We are no longer sinners trying to earn forgiveness. We are forgiven people, living in the light of a new covenant, a covenant established by the blood of Jesus. The silent danger that no one talks about is one of the biggest warnings in Hebrews about something that happens so slowly that you don't even notice it: spiritual drift. Let us take heed to the end that we may drift away, Hebrews 2 verse 1. Spiritual drift doesn't happen overnight. It's not a big decision to abandon the faith, it's the little things. Skipping prayer because, I'll get to it later. Letting doubt creep in without addressing it, choosing comfort over confidence. Before long, you realize you've drifted too far from where you started. The people to whom Hebrews was written were facing this very problem. They were tempted to fall back into old ways, old beliefs, old habits. But the author warns them, do not throw away your confidence, for it has a great reward. Hebrews 10 verse 35. The question is, where is your confidence now? Real-life example, the man who almost missed out. There is a story about a man named David who grew up in a religious family. He did everything by the book, attending services, following the rules, and never questioning anything. But deep down, he felt empty. That he thought, is that all there is? Just a ritual. One day, he overheard a sermon about the difference between keeping rules and having a real relationship with God. A statement that struck him. By one offering he has perfected forever those who are being sanctified, Hebrews 10 verse 14. For the first time, he realized, faith is not about following rules, it is about following a person. That moment changed his life. He stopped trying to earn God's love and began living in it. That is the message of the book of Hebrews. Faith is not a struggle, it is a trust. When we drift, we don't notice it right away. We don't feel the obvious pull. It's like a boat quietly drifting away from the harbor without anyone noticing. One day you look back and realize you've drifted farther than you thought. Spiritual drift is one of the quietest dangers, because it doesn't cause immediate alarm. There are no alarm bells, no urgent warnings. It's just a gradual shift, bit by bit. And then, when you realize it, you're in a completely different place. You used to have a strong faith, but now you feel cold. You used to pray every day, but now you only pray when something goes wrong. You used to believe, but now you doubt. Drifting begins when we stop actively seeking God. When we put comfort above obedience. When we let the busyness of life push our relationship with Him to the sidelines. But God never abandons us, that He always calls us back. And the book of Hebrews reminds us that our hope is not in whether we are good enough, strong enough, or faithful enough. Our hope is in the one who never changes. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever, Hebrews 13 verse 8. So how do we combat spiritual drift? How do we keep our faith strong? First, we need to recognize the signs of drift. If you feel less eager to pray, if the Bible no longer appeals to you, if you find yourself avoiding conversations about God, then you are probably drifting. Recognizing that is the first step to getting back on track. Second, reprioritize. Be intentional about spending time with God. Don't let other things take His place in your life. We cannot expect to maintain a strong relationship with God if we do not spend time with Him. Third, remind yourself of why you believe in the first place. Remember the moments when God has touched your life. Remember the love, grace, and salvation He has given you. Faith is not just about feelings, but about choosing to trust Him, even when the feelings are not as strong as before. Finally, cling to God's promises that He is not just your anchor, but your keeper. Do not throw away your confidence, which has a great reward, Hebrews 10 verse 35. Drifting is not inevitable. We can resist it, that we can get back up, that we can stand firm. And most importantly, we can trust that God is always ready to welcome us back into His loving arms. Hebrews 11 is often called the Hall of Faith, a list of people who trusted God even when they couldn't see the results immediately. Noah built an ark before the flood came. Abraham left his homeland without knowing where he was going. Moses gave up power to suffer with his people. These people weren't perfect. They doubted, they struggled, and sometimes they even failed. But there was one thing that set them apart: they didn't give up. Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. Hebrews 11 verse 1. Faith isn't about having all the answers. It's about trusting the one who does. Think about Noah for a moment. Imagine the sheer absurdity of what he was called to do. Build a massive boat, on dry land, with no sign of rain. People must have thought he was insane. They mocked him, they ridiculed him, but Noah kept building. Why? Because he had faith in what God had told him. He trusted that even though he couldn't see the rain, it was coming. That's what faith looks like. It acts even when there's no visible evidence yet. And isn't that the hardest part? We want to see results before we step forward. We want proof before we trust, but real faith moves before the outcome is clear. Then there's Abraham. He was comfortable, established, and secure in his homeland. And then God told him to leave. To pack up everything and go, to a place he didn't even know. Can you imagine telling your family and friends, "I'm leaving, but I don't know where I'm going yet"? That's what Abraham did. He left behind comfort for the unknown. Why? Because he believed in the promise. God told him he would be the father of many nations, even though he and Sarah were old and childless. From a human perspective, it was impossible. But faith doesn't rely on human logic. Faith steps out when common sense says, "This is crazy." And then there's Moses. Raised in Pharaoh's palace, he had every privilege, every luxury. He could have stayed in comfort, enjoying a life of ease. But he chose something different. He chose to identify with his suffering people rather than cling to a position of power. Why? Because he saw something greater. He looked beyond the temporary to the eternal. That's the essence of faith. It looks beyond what's right in front of us and focuses on what truly matters. Faith isn't about playing it safe. It's not about staying in a comfortable bubble. It's about stepping into the unknown, even when it doesn't make sense. Every single person in Hebrews 11 had moments where they could have given up, moments where they could have chosen the easy path. But they didn't, they pressed forward. And that's what makes them different. Let's bring this into today's world. Faith isn't just an ancient concept, it's something we all wrestle with. Maybe you're in a season where you feel like you're building an ark with no rain in sight. Maybe you feel like Abraham, stepping into something unknown and uncertain. Maybe you're like Moses, faced with a choice between comfort and calling. Faith is trusting that even when you don't see the full picture, God does. Real faith doesn't mean you won't have doubts. It doesn't mean you won't struggle. Even the greatest heroes of faith had their moments of weakness. But the difference is, they didn't let their doubts define them. They kept going, they held on to the promises, even when they couldn't see them yet. That's what Hebrews 11 is all about. It's a reminder that faith isn't passive, it's active. It's not just believing with your mind, but stepping forward with your life. It's building the ark before the flood. It's leaving home without a map. It's choosing suffering over comfort when God calls you to something greater. And here's the powerful part, these people didn't see the full fulfillment of God's promises in their lifetime. They lived by faith, but they died still waiting. And yet, their faith wasn't in vain. Because God's promises are bigger than a single lifetime. They reach beyond what we can see. So, what does real faith look like for you? Maybe it's trusting God with your future when everything feels uncertain. Maybe it's stepping out in obedience when you don't have all the answers. Maybe it's holding on when everything in you wants to let go. Faith isn't about having it all figured out, it's about trusting the one who does. And just like Noah, Abraham, and Moses, when we walk by faith, we step into something far greater than we could ever imagine. The final message of the book of Hebrews is simple: everything in this world will fade, but the kingdom of God will last forever. Therefore, since we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken, let us be thankful and worship God acceptably with reverence and awe. Hebrews 12 verse 28. That's a bold statement, isn't it? Everything around us, wealth, success, power, all of it will disappear. But faith, that remains. And that leads us to the real question: what are you building your life upon? Think about how much time and energy we pour into things that won't last. We chase after careers, we accumulate possessions, we strive for recognition. But at the end of the day, what of that will remain? Imagine a great storm sweeping through your life, stripping everything away. What would still be standing? That's the test of true security. That's the difference between building on shifting sand and building on solid rock. Throughout history, kingdoms have risen and fallen. Mighty empires that once seemed invincible, Babylon, Rome, even modern superpowers, have crumbled over time. Nothing built by human hands lasts forever, but God's kingdom is different. It cannot be shaken. It's not dependent on economies, governments, or cultural trends. It is eternal, unshakable, and far beyond anything we can fully grasp. So, the challenge is clear: what will you choose? Will you drift with the temporary, or will you anchor yourself to the eternal? Will you cling to familiar ways, or will you step into something greater? Do you simply know about God, or do you truly know Him? This isn't just about belief, it's about alignment. What you value, where you invest your heart and time, ultimately reveals where your foundation lies. Jesus spoke of this in Matthew 7 when he described two builders. One built on sand that it was quick, easy, and probably looked just as good as the other house. But when the storm came, it collapsed. The other built on rock that it took more effort, more patience, and probably seemed unnecessary at times. But when the storm came, it stood firm. That's the nature of an unshakable kingdom. It withstands the storms. And here's the thing: storms will come. Life isn't easy. We will face trials, uncertainties, and losses. But faith in God's eternal kingdom means we don't have to live in fear. We don't have to scramble for control. We can stand firm, knowing that our hope isn't in something fragile. Look at the world around you. People are searching for stability. They put their trust in money, but economies collapse. They put their trust in relationships, but people fail. They put their trust in achievements, but success is fleeting. It's a constant cycle of chasing something that never fully satisfies. But Jesus offers something better: a foundation that doesn't shift. A security that doesn't depend on circumstances. So ask yourself, what are you holding on to that won't last? What fears keep you from fully stepping into God's kingdom? What would change in your life if you truly lived as though His kingdom was your greatest treasure? This isn't about religion, it's about reality. The reality that one day, everything temporary will fade, and only what's eternal will remain. Living for God's kingdom isn't about withdrawing from the world. It's about living in the world with a different perspective. It's about making choices with eternity in mind. It's about loving people, standing for truth, and investing in things that have lasting impact. It's about faith that isn't shaken when everything else is. Hebrews reminds us, we are receiving a kingdom that cannot be shaken. That means we don't have to live like people who are constantly afraid of losing everything. We already belong to something permanent. So, what does that look like in daily life? It looks like peace when the world is in chaos. It looks like generosity when others cling to their wealth. It looks like faithfulness when culture says to compromise. It looks like hope when circumstances seem hopeless. The unshakable kingdom isn't just something we wait for after we die. It's something we live in now. It's a reality that shapes how we see everything. And when we truly grasp that, it changes everything. As we conclude this story, we cannot help but reflect on the eternity of God's kingdom. One day, everything around us will pass away, but God's love and promises will never change. Ask yourself, what are you building your life on? On temporary things or on the solid foundation of your faith in God? In times of trial and difficulty, it is only in His love that we can find comfort and strength to overcome. Jesus taught us that if we live according to His word, we will have an unshakable life. Always trust in His unconditional love and listen to Him every day. That is the way to become more perfect. May God give us the ability to live fully in His love and show it in our daily actions. If this message challenges or encourages you, please share it with someone who needs it. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more Bible insights. Jesus is greater. The new covenant is better. And your faith in Him changes everything.